Hello friends, painting enthusiasts, and welcome to a brand new video. Today we are going to be taking a simple blank canvas and turning it into something realistic, vibrant, and hopefully also something that just feels nice and inspiring. Moving along, we're not actually going to start by putting paint on the canvas. I'm going to head over to my drafting desk and start a bit of a sketch for just figuring out where all of my subjects are. I personally like to boot up Photoshop, apply a grid, do a sketch in reference to that. However, if you don't love the drawing process in general, you just want to jump right into the painting, you can download the traceable up over on my Patreon, where you can also get the ad-free version of this video. That said, once we have our sketch complete, we are going to pick our brushes, select our pigments, and from there, we can jump into the painting process. Yet again, we'll grab our 1-inch flat-headed brush, and we'll also make the brush just a little bit damp to help keep our paint wet longer, and it'll also help with the blending process. We're going to break the sky down into 3 sections. Here we have the red, here the yellowish orange, and here we have the blue. We're starting right in the middle. Now for the sky, we're going to start with a good amount of titanium white, hint of Mars black. This is going to give us a good value for that section. And then we need to actually mix the orange, which is going to be in the sky. We're going to use a lot more of our Cad yellow than our Cad red because our Cad red's a lot stronger of a pigment. And then I think we'll just double down on the Mars black and titanium white, desaturate it just a hint more. And from there, I think we can throw this on the canvas. And we'll actually start here on the canvas by mapping in all of these sharply drawn little areas of orange. And this is actually the majority of this bottom third section. I'm only going to go to couple millimeters from the bottom though, because I want to switch my brush before we get into the real detail work. This brush is great for letting us block in big areas, but we have a lot better for the real details. So from there, we'll switch over to the smaller flat-headed brush and again, be quite sharp with our applications. Now, as you can see, we can fairly quickly and confidently work around all of these little drawings that I have in here. I'm taking some of the paint from previous areas. We'll also add in new paint from our palette, and you don't want to continuously just be scraping past paint because eventually you thin it, and we want nice thick layers for our first application. By the way, this is just a darker base layer. We are going to make it a lot brighter, but we do need to build our foundation first. And it's also a nice, easy way to just get started, get the rust off, and ensure that we're ready to do the real blends. These big skies can look complicated. When you break them down into simple steps, it's not hard at all. And just like that, we are done with all of these little guys. Nice and easy start. Now from there, we'll continue working on those clouds by making a much brighter, more yellow heavy mix. So I'm actually mixing on top of this, so I grab a little bit of it, that way it's nice and cohesive, but I'm also adding mostly white and yellow. So preferably, while this is still a little bit wet to the touch, we're going to do a wet into wet mix where we take that nice new yellow we have, we're going to apply it right into the middle of our clouds because we have our sun right down here and the middle portion will be a little bit brighter. Then I'm going to start blending this out, as you can see, and I'll create nice sharp little lines back and forth. The idea here is that we have a lot of little clouds overlapping each other. We want it to dissipate and get a little bit darker as we get towards those edges. The center remaining nice and bright. And we can even go in multiple times into that center with our highlight. just like so. And the more we do this, the more we'll create soft gradients that will start to really sell this as a sunset. That said, these are just base layers. It's going to look a little bit awkward in the beginning, and that's okay. That's really just part of the painting process and makes it all the more rewarding once we get it the way we really want it to be in the end. So right now I'm just softening a lot of those blends, bringing our yellow into that more brown orangey pigment. And it gets pretty complicated in that middle section. So I'll tell you what, we're gonna get a little bit closer and we'll switch our brush. And actually, you know what? As we got closer, I thought, let's just double down on that yellow one more time with the big brush. Softly have it work its way out. Like so. We want to build this middle up many a time. But from there, we're going to switch to our smaller version of that same brush. You've seen the flat-headed brush before. We're back at it. I'm going to work over all of those smaller spots down towards the center. And if you can leave a little streaks that are horizontal, it'll add nice details later on in the painting process. So it might look a little bit messy now, but it's one of those things where it will help you out. You just have to trust the process and keep incorporating them. Here you can see I'm breaking up some of the larger highlights with the smaller brush. And the idea is that all of the really yellow portions are the bottoms of the clouds. And then the light works its way up the cloud and it progressively gets darker because it can only work through so much of a dense cloud. Here's a great example of that. Now I'll take a step back. I'm going to double down on some of those yellows right towards the bottom. And again, it really won't look the way we want it to until we add a couple layers of this yellow. But remember, as you add them, to continuously leave areas that are more thin and a bit darker. Still want the edges as a whole to be darker, so I'll apply that when I have a little bit more water on my brush or when I just don't have as much paint on my brush. And then when I have a lot of paint, like when I go back to my palette, that's when I go back up to the top and I reinstigate some of these more dramatic yellows and applications. Also, can't forget to do these little guys. We'll go over them a couple of times too. There we go. It's already nice and thick, which I love in these paintings. And from there, we'll double down on our highlight, making it even brighter. Last time we mixed with a bit of that. This time we are not. We are just mixing with yellow and titanium white. We're also going to switch to our filbert brush. As you can see, it has nice round edges. That makes it great for blending softer subjects, much like our clouds. So from there, we'll grab that with our filbert. We're going to go into the middle section because, again, this is where the majority of the light is going to be coming from with that sun where it is. We'll apply it on the bottoms of our sharper strokes, aka the bottoms of our clouds. And then as we start to run out of pigment, we can just blend upwards with this brush. And as you can see, despite the fact that the pigment underneath it has started to dry, it's still creating really nice soft blends because of those really rounded edges. Here we'll do some on the other side. A little bit of a blend up, a little bit of a blend up. We're just continuing to differentiate our clouds. And then we have a lot of it right down here. So at this point, we're really layering it on. Even the darker areas should have a little bit for the sake of softening them. We don't want there to be too much of that contrast where the light is almost all consuming. And if we need help blending, we just make our brush a little bit more damp, add a hint of water to it, and that'll help greatly. So we're going in, soft blend. All of this paint is fully dry, by the way. It's really the brush doing a lot of the work. I'm just taking it out for a spin. And again, just like that, we have the start to a complex, yet relatively easily renderable sky. Just need to break it down into our simple subjects or mixes. And you know what, sometimes it's going to be a little more tricky. That's okay, we just keep at it until we get it exactly the way we want it. Some of us are going to be a little more practiced with our mixing. This is going to be a new palette for some of us too. That's okay. With acrylics, you can just keep layering until you get exactly what you want. And that's what we're doing. All right, so we have a nice warm, hearty base there, great foundation for our painting. And now we're going to really liven it up, add some vibrancy with a different yellow. We've been working with a cadmium yellow deep hue. We're going to switch to a cadmium yellow medium hue, much more of what you typically associate with a sunset, but we didn't want too much of it because it can be really overwhelming, though a bit of it in that central spot with a wash, it'll look perfect. Now we have a very wet brush. We're going to grab hint of our new cad yellow, hint of our titanium white. We want more of the cad yellow than the titanium white, but we want to mix this like it's a watercolor, so incredibly thin, as you can see, mostly water. So we are going to apply this directly in the center, and as you can see, it is so much more yellow than it was. But we don't want this throughout the entirety of it because it would just be really overwhelming. So now I'm going to go in with just a wet brush, and I'm going to slowly blend it to the right, and then I'll slowly blend it to the left. But you can see how it dissipates, and it's barely over the edges. For the most part, it is just existing in this central spot. If you haven't done a wash before, you can try it on a different canvas, but the point of this is essentially to retain the values and the image that you had, but just change the color a little bit. Now from there, we want to use that yellow in conjunction with our past yellow, get a good mix of the two, titanium white, and we'll use this to add some real intentional highlights into that central spot. Then for the first time, we'll switch to our liner brush so we can get some nice detail work in. So from there, we'll grab that beautiful highlight. We'll head into the base of some of our clouds, which are again the most highlighted areas. And I'm going to throw this in a couple of them to begin, just so that we have it spread out, but only in that central area. And then as I run out of paint, because I've applied it to a lot of those mid sections, I will work it towards the right hand side, work it towards that left hand side, just let it dissipate. But the idea is we have the majority of it very centralized and hints of it on the edge. It's much like the wash, we're just further personifying that glow. We need a lot of it, of course, right down here. Already, so much more vibrancy, life, and light. Now we're going to take a break from the top of this to work on this bottom strip. Then we can head back here once we have a better idea of what highlights we can work with. Now for the bottom red section, we want to look at this pigment right here because this is a good transitionary color. We want something close to it, but a little bit darker and a little bit more red. So I'll start with red, then I'll add some Mars black. Obviously far too dark, so we add in our titanium white, and now we have more of a pink. We don't want that, so we'll go back to our cad yellow, which is going to be the warmer version, the deep hue. And maybe we'll double down on some red, some Mars black. But I think we're close. I think we're very close. And you know what? Just like that, I think we found it. So now, taking that same larger flat-headed brush, I'm going to begin by just cutting a nice sharp line across my horizon right here. It doesn't have to be perfect because we will be layering this water over top of it later, but it will just make our lives easier if we have an easily discernible stop point. From there, I'll use the corners of it just to craft around our sun-to-be, and then I'll apply as much paint as I can in the negative spaces. I'm not trying to get real details with this because it is a little big for these spots, but I can still deliver a lot of paint very quickly and make my life quite a bit easier. Now, once we've essentially applied all of our negative space, and I am just about done doing so, we are going to switch our brush over to the smaller flat-headed brush, and I'll get you a little bit closer. So here we go, grabbing a bit more of that pigment, going to start working in all of the negative space that I still have white canvas showing in. Let us craft around these beautiful highlights. Right now it's going to look a little bit basic in relation to that which it surrounds because we already went in and we applied layers and values, details to the yellow. We're yet to do that to this red. We're just getting started down here. So don't be disappointed if it looks a little basic. At this point it's meant to look a little basic, but we will build it up and we'll make it look like a great complementing subject for our recently applied yellow. And of course, we'll work pretty carefully around our boat here. We do have a couple of unique subjects we want to keep in here. Though if you do happen to paint over it, don't worry. You can always go ahead and just go back to the start of the video, see how it looked, resketch it. Or if you're up over on Patreon, you can download the traceable and make it really, really easy. But with that, I think we have a decent base layer worked in. Now we are working with acrylics and they are quite thin. I do want to apply a second layer, but I think I want this layer to be a little bit more of a gray heavy mix. So I'm going to interject some extra titanium white, Mars black, and we'll throw this on there. Again, starting with a larger flat-headed brush. Now we have that good, slightly more vibrant red showing through, but we're getting into a more complex color. So here, again, it's pretty interesting. We're using the same color, at least the same colors for the mix, but because we're using more titanium white and Mars black, it looks a little more purple. It can even look a little like a desaturated orange rather than a red. But this goes to show A, what layering can do, but B, what using a more subtle color can do. I think this is already a much more refined look. And we'll just go ahead and cover our last layer. That said, the last two paintings I did may have accidentally made them 4.5 and 6 hours long. So for the sake of brevity, I'm going to go ahead and just go over all of this, and then together we'll jump into the next step. Now from there, we're going to take a step back, take our liner brush, grab some of that wonderful pigment, and I'll just sketch on a couple of little clouds which are breaking off from our bigger clouds. This will be, for the most part, a series of little dots and whatnot, but they are going to overlay the clouds in the background, establish some depth, because realistically that which we've been painting are just clouds that are overlapping that background, and we want to further develop that, give them some additional personality. I think especially these ones over here could use a good amount of that. And it doesn't have to be exactly how it is in the reference photo. Feel free to take those artistic liberties and make it your own. But I do think we need some level of bonus detail, and very happy with these so far. There we go. Just try to make them nice and unique. Now from there, we're going to double down on that mix by making it a bit brighter and adding some of our cadmium yellow deep hue. We want this to act as a transitionary color between the light background that we have, which is essentially here, and this darker area. So I think this is pretty pretty. So as we reapproach our canvas here, I'm going to go back in with the liner brush, and I'm going to start by applying this pigment around all of the edges of my pre-existing clouds. And this is a very watery application. Here's a more opaque application. So you can see the real difference between something that's thin and something that's thick, especially with a darker base. But the idea here is that we have that light. It's working its way around our cloud because it is behind our cloud. These clouds are backlit. They're almost silhouetted a little bit, but it's a good start, though we are qualifying it as a start because we need to do a lot of work here. And that's okay. That's really the fun of it, just slowly watching it come together as you craft something you can be really proud of. And when you put in the time and you put in all of these little markings, I think you just get more and more proud of what you eventually make. So with that, doubling down on some of those new highlights on the edge, and then this is fully dry to the touch, but if I make my brush fairly damp, I can do a bit of a blend downwards using more of the body of the liner. And now we can see this larger transition starting to occur. Transition, transition, did you listen? Little Anthony Fantanoism. But we'll continue our soft blends. And already you can see more dimension in it. Now I think it's actually quite nice seeing the variance of the center with the right and the left hand sides, though we are going to do exactly what we just did to both the right and left hand sides. It's one of those things where we want the majority of that transition to be happening in the central space because we have more light there, and therefore the transition will be more dramatic. We'll have a higher contrast. However, this is only layer number one. We're going to do quite a few of these. So for this first one, for the sake of making this not a silhouette and not simply two-dimensional, we are going to apply this slight highlight, this mild gradient, all the way around our clouds. Do a nice little blend down using our damp brush because our paint is fully dry on the canvas now. We're doing a wet into dry blend, but I like it a lot. And I think we can head back into our palette. There we go. A lot of highlight around that sun to be as well. From there, we'll just add some extra cadmium yellow deep hue, a little bit of our extra cad red, titanium white. We are brightening we are warming. And I think this right here is a great next step. Yet again, I think we'll start right here in the middle, and oh yeah, already I can tell I love this. We're definitely moving in the right direction. It's feeling warm. It's feeling like the sun. We can begin by, again, just working it around everything. Though before it dries, we do want to go back to it and do that long blend. Now, every time I do this, I kind of extend my clouds a little bit. I just continuously layer it over the sky. It's not that it's a wholly intentional thing, it's just that we want to make sure that our edges are nice and bright. And because of that, we might need to go back in a little bit later and build up our yellows in the sky again. Just make some of those areas nice and sharp. But that is okay. Don't let that scare you from applying some great pigment to the outskirts of our clouds. Now I'll head back into this central space. This is where we really brighten it, build those gradients. Soft blends, wet into dry with a damp brush. I'm working my brush in circular motions because it keeps things smooth. And I let it dissipate as we get towards the edges as well, because again, we want those to be a bit darker. When we get a little bit farther back, you can really start to see that variance between the center and the edges. Though we're not done with that center. We'll go back in, do yet another layer, really building this up, making it that shining centerpiece of the painting. We can also do it to the little clouds in the surrounding areas. Can't forget about them. But already starting to like it. Now, yet again, I want more highlight. I want to lean deeper into that yellow, into that red, getting something a bit more saturated. And this is probably going to be our final highlight, but we'll see. Now this should look pretty great in this central spot. You know what? I thought I was going to contain it exclusively in that midsection, but because we're painting it over a darker backdrop, it itself is darker, and I think we can extend it to the edges more than we were going to. So we'll give it a test. We'll do the blend. Painting as a whole is meant to be exploratory. That's what we're doing. But you know what? That's so much better. Okay. You know, we're getting to that point where it's starting to look good. I'm getting excited. So we'll apply that not only to the center, but also to our edges. I'm at the point where I'm accepting that we're almost fully repainting the sun, and the yellow that surrounds it, that's okay. We are on a hot streak here with our mixes and our applications, and I will happily take it. There we go. All right, from there, we'll just head back into our mixture of both of our cadmium yellows and our titanium white, and we'll just start to re-separate some of these clouds which may have gotten a little too clunky. Should be a fairly easy process to jump around and just figure out the areas you still want them, but also we can use this as an opportunity to interject it into some newer areas as well. So don't feel constrained by your past applications, and really just have fun re-interjecting light wherever you see fit. This is one of those things where you can get really creative should you want to, or you can keep it nice and simple, depending upon if you want a bit more of a minimal look or something extravagant. I, for one, feel like we're painting a fairly extravagant sky, so I'm going in with a lot of them, and I'm just really breaking it up. They also don't all have to be hyper vibrant and saturated. You can see these are much less yellow than what we have here, and that's actually great because it looks like there's a little bit of a soft shadow in between. It's all up to you though. Now we'll take a step back, we'll grab a little bit of that pigment, move it off to the side, make it very watery because yet again we are doing a little bit of a wash, a glaze. I'm going to apply that on the left and the right hand side of our sky. And this is going to merge, as you can see, that base layer and this layer aesthetically. Do a little bit of a finger painting blend. If you do use a finger for blending, make sure that it is very clean. It's really easy to leave too many oils on your finger and then make an area so that it doesn't adopt water properly. But if you're careful, it can work really well. And I think we were. So far, so good. We'll continue to be careful with it, but I'm going to double down a little bit more. And then we need to dramatically brighten that center yet again, especially the highlights. So let's head back to our palette. Actually, you know what? I was taking a step back, I was looking at it and I realized I really like the orange wash on the side. I kind of want more of a yellow hazy wash through here. So I think we'll grab a little bit of our titanium white, a little bit of our cadmium yellow medium hue, hint of our cadmium yellow deep hue. So we're using all three in this. We don't want it to be too much of anything, but we want it to be in that brighter yellow realm. Here you can see I'm just continuously mixing it out until I have something I feel like complements all of them well. And then I think I'm actually going to start at the bottom and work my way up. Like so. Work it over that central area, out into the right and left hand side. We're just softening the sky as a whole. Significantly less dramatic. And that's gorgeous. Okay. You know what? While it's wet, we're heading back in. Now, the sun itself has this really nice orangish red hue. So I'm going to mix up a wash that's cadmium red and cadmium yellow deep hue, making it extremely watery as we do. I'm going to apply that in the middle and I'm going to work that out. I want it to be more red dominant, I think. This will have a great stark look to it later on, but we're just going to build that out from the center. I don't want it to expand too dramatically, but I like that. Then we're going to go to our yellows, our titanium white, and we can recraft the edges to a lot of these clouds. Because everything has that recent wash on it, it'll, for the most part, be this nice wet into wet. Might do it with a bit of orange. And just play with the colors until you love it. And now we can just take a couple of steps back. Again, I'm going to grab that titanium white, cad yellow deep, mix up this nice bright pigment and instill those highlights, because every time we apply that wash, we bring our values down just a little bit. So as a whole, our painting gets darker, and I'm just re-instigating the light towards the central area. We did this great job of kind of unifying everything, making it cohesive through those washes, but we still want portions of it to stand out, namely these center pieces. And for that, we can do so by just going in yet again and building those highlights. Not tricky. And think it just looks better and better through those applications. This might be a little too saturated, but I don't want to touch it until we've applied the actual sun. And if so, we can just go back and correct it. No real worry. Speaking of, there we go, applying that sun, we will take a lot of our titanium white, a little bit of our cad yellow deep. Not much though. This is predominantly a titanium white mix. And then we're going to go in, we're going to reapply that sun of ours. Probably take a couple mixes, but we will build this up to be the centerpiece of our painting. And I really like it nice and sharp like that, but what you can do is you can make it more of our yellow heavy. Apply that around the edges, like so. And from there, take off the excess paint of your brush, do a little blend out into the red through horizontal randomized streaks. And that'll add to that really nice warm hazy look. Okay, so taking a step back, really like this as a base. We are going to double down on some of the highlights, some of the saturation. I do think we need more of a pinkish orange right around the sun, and maybe to re-instigate some highlights throughout the midsection of the clouds, but we're almost there, and then we're on to the top half of the sky, which is going to make all of this just pop wonderfully. Now for that sun glow, I am going to start our mix with some cad red and some cadmium yellow medium hue. We also want an abundance of titanium white, and this pigment needs to be brighter than what we have here. Also needs to be more saturated, but not dramatically so. So I'm going to add a good amount of yellow until we get it to that orange state, but this is far too saturated in relation to that. So I'll grab some Mars Black just using the corner of my brush. We'll work that in. And you can see Mars Black, incredibly strong pigment, took this down to something quite dark quite quickly. So now we'll run back the yellow, the red, we'll recreate something in that vein, but here we have the relation, and I think a little bit brighter, we're going to have exactly what we want. Just brighter, more saturated, more red. Perfect. As for our application, I am going to grab our liner brush, head in right around it, start to do a bit of a blend out using the larger body of that liner. Try to create something even warmer and stand out. Though I think honestly, we could go brighter. I'll add some titanium white. We'll add some of our yellow, hint of our cad red, and we'll go in and we'll just do it again. It'll be a little bit darker than on our palette because we are mixing it with our pre-existing mix. And that, while not a lot darker, was darker. So we'll apply that, and I can already tell I like this a lot better. I think the fact that it is a bit more pink and peachy makes it stand out in a beautiful but unique way. Again, softening edges more dramatically. Go back in. There we go. Add some of that pink to these. Just like that. I think we made a pretty dramatic difference. And here we are, from a distance, reintegrating those highlights time after time, taking the excess pigment off of my brush, going in with the blend. Don't want to blend this out too far because it is quite a bit brighter now. And I want this to be special, right around the sun. So I think that's probably as far as we go with that right there. At least for now. I think we can also bump it up to be a bit more dramatic, but I don't want to do that just yet. I think that's something we wait on while we complete more of the painting for the sake of balancing all of it and making sure it looks the way we want to. Right now I'm also just doubling down on the actual sun itself, because every time we did that we just made it smaller and smaller, and I wanted it to be a little bit more sizable, like so. Soften the edges, again with those horizontal markings if we want. I do like that look, so I'm doubling down on it, but there we go. Now, while we're in the business of adding highlights, I think we'll also grab some extra titanium white, a little bit of each of our yellows, work that into a nice bright mix up here, like so, and we'll reinstigate that into the central bright areas throughout here. One of those things where, because we're working with water, despite the fact that we've done this before, as it's dried, it dried a little bit darker, and going back in and reinstigating it is going to have a really positive impact on the contrast in the painting as a whole. Letting it dissipate as you get out towards the edges. There we go. All right, so at this point, I think that base at the bottom, it's looking good. We could definitely go in and add additional highlights, but I don't want to yet because I want to see what the top of the sky looks like. I want to do the water. I want to balance all of it. And at the end of the painting, that's when we go back and that's when we kind of finish all of the subjects at once. That way we make sure they are cohesive, they fit together, they have the right values kind of in relation to each other. But with that so far, I am very happy, and we're going to start jumping into the top of the painting. That said, it's dark. It's really dark. It is 12:30 at night, and I think this is something we pick up tomorrow. So I'm going to get some rest, and I'll see you in the morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to the afternoon. Today, we are going to continue with our sky, and I think we'll actually finish it. We have a great base in that midsection in the bottom. Today, we're going to head up to the top, and we're going to make them all cohesive so they'll fit together. We're still taking our time, taking it slow, making sure that we approach a very complex sky in very simple ways so that cumulatively we end up with something we love and something that isn't too daunting. So with that, let's grab our palette, let's grab a brand new pigment, and let's have some fun. Pro tip, if your acrylics dry the lid shut, just use tools. Nice and easy. And here for the first time, we'll apply some ultramarine blue to our palette. This will be wonderful in our sky. Now, hard preface, my palette is nice and dry, so I'm not mixing with any of these. Though for our sky, we are going to start with two pigments. One is going to be a lot of ultramarine blue, a little bit of our Mars black, also an abundance of titanium white, starting off with essentially an equal amount of titanium white as I am to ultramarine blue. Just a hint of Mars black in this, and then, you know what? We're going to head over here with that same mix, and we're going to make it brighter but more gray. So I'm doubling down on the titanium white, just like so. I'll add a hint more Mars black, and this will be for the bottom of the sky, the area that receives the most light, and this will be for the top of the sky. Though the more I mix the two together, the more I realize I want this to be a bit more blue heavy, so we'll double down on that ultramarine, just like that. I think we have two beautiful colors which will work wonderfully together. So let's jump over into the canvas and start some painting for the day. So we'll jump into this with that nice blue pigment at the top. My brush is damp, so it's spreading beautifully. Nice and easy. We'll work that down to about the bottom third, maybe even the halfway point. And then we'll start grabbing some of that more gray version. We'll apply that right under. You can see that I'm not having them touch though. That we're going to save. And I am painting over all of my drawings. That's okay. I will just sketch them in later. The first drawing helps me figure out where they're going to be and just understand the image better. And again, we have the traceable, we have the sketch. We can always put it right back in. Then we're going to take more of that mid grayish blue, like so. As you can see, I added a little bit more titanium white to it. And we're going to mix that up into the more dramatic ultramarine blue that we applied. And I'm going to blend it up in an X-shaped pattern. That way we're not only moving the pigment left and right, but also up and down. This is great for larger blends and big skies where you want to do all of it while it's still wet. And then I'm going to clean my brush fairly well. We'll add a little bit more titanium white to our gray. And we'll continue working this down in the painting. It's worth noting that we're going to apply so many layers, so much pigment on top of this. Really is just a base layer, so if it's not perfect, if there are areas you don't love, if it's a little streaky, that's okay. But we do want to make sure that it's nice and thick. And that's really our primary objective here. Said, if you do find it is a little more streaky than you want it to be, just go in with a little bit less pressure, and that should alleviate a lot of the streakiness. Now here I'm going to relatively delicately work my way around our clouds. However, if I accidentally cover them up, I'm okay with that. We were going to go back in and paint more clouds, so we can just fix those up when we do that. Right now it's kind of just about getting this paint on while it's all still wet, getting those smooth, thick blends. And we'll worry about the division and the cohesion a little bit later. I say worry, really, we're not going to worry about it. It's not going to be troublesome. We've got this. I do a little bit more down here. I think this is another interesting protruding cloud. So, like that. Off to a strong start. So taking a step back, I think we have a really nice gradient here. We have a nice bottom. These two don't yet fit together. We need a transitional pigment between here, but we do want to wait for this to dry first. Again, just to reiterate, we have two very different colors. The top is more of a blue, the bottom more of an orange. They're complementary colors, which means they really help each other pop. It creates a really large separation. And right now they will feel separated, but it's that dramatic contrast, which in the end will make this a really diverse in spectrum sky. And the next layer is going to bring it together. So if you're looking at it right now and you're thinking, they don't go together, don't worry, they will. We'll get it there very soon. Just trust the process and we'll make it happen. Now, as for our mix, we do want a peachy desaturated orange as our base. So I'm going to grab some cadmium yellow DPU because I want it to stay warm, cadmium red, an abundance of our titanium white, hint of our Mars black, and I do mean just a hint. You can see I'm taking off the excess over there. I want this to be a nice bright pigment. In fact, it needs to be the same value, if not a little bit brighter than the blue that we just rendered. So we're close. Going to slowly interject little bits of our cad yellow now. And I do it slowly because if this is a very Mars black heavy mix, the yellow and the black will mix a green. We don't want that though. The red in it is stopping that from happening. But eventually we might overwhelm it with yellow and black. So we're just slowly interjecting that until we get this nice peachy bright mix. And I think we are very close. There we go. That's perfect. So jumping into this, I am going to start with the larger flat-headed brush, and I am going to overlap the majority of the blue that we have down here at the bottom, which I know might seem a little bit redundant, but I wanted that gray blue as a slightly cooler base for this, because this is again a transitionary space. We have our bright, warm, peachy color. We have our slightly cooler, bluish gray base. And we want them to build this and this into one strong, cohesive image. And we're going to do that through transparency, we're going to do that through open spaces, we're going to do that through a lot of applications. Already, I like this color as part of the amalgamated colors. We'll throw a little bit of it down here for the sake of cohesion. We'll put some over there eventually. But right now, once I get a good amount of this pigment on here, we're going to head up. Slightly more damp mix because I want it to be semi-transparent to a point. And I'm going to create some wispy, semi-transparent clouds up here. And I sketched these in initially, but I think I have a good idea of where they should be. So I'm not going to sketch them in again, though you are more than welcome to. We're going to leave a lot of openings. We're going to soften edges with very soft brush strokes along all of our edges. And already I think we have this great transition from A, a warmer base into a cooler sky, but B, very strong opaque markings down here into something a bit more loose and airy towards the top. But it's all starting to come together. And then when I have almost no pigment left, we can go back in, we can kind of dry brush some softer aesthetics, make it a bit more dreamy. Just like that. From there, we'll get quite a bit closer using our filbert brush, and we'll continue to double down on the layers that we like, making them more opaque, the clouds that'll just be a bit more dense. And again, this brush is fantastic because it has those nice rounded edges. So when we apply this to the center, as we are, I can just blend it out to the sides really simply. You can see how there's almost no brush stroke in that. And that's just because I'm using the rounded corners of the brush. Now it looks like the middle of the cloud is a bit more dense, gives us some great volume in there. And that's really what we're trying to do. When we apply it the first time, especially in those thin layers, we get something that's a little bit darker because the darker bluish gray is showing through it. And then we have this opportunity to go back over it a second time. And now we're applying it over a lighter layer, and we can make it thicker. So this application ends up being brighter, more pigmented, more of the color that we have on the palette. And when it's blended up softly into our first application, we have a lot of volume. It looks three-dimensional. Here we'll do it again, light on the bottom, we blend it up. We can go into here, but I kind of like how transparent it is. Maybe I'll just do a little bit, just a hint, for the sake of that depth. Yeah, I think that worked really well. We can do a hint up here. Again, it's a blend up, really soft. And while it's far from perfect, while we can definitely do a lot to improve it, I think we're already on to a pretty strong start here. Again, lots of little clouds, but if we approach them one by one, we figure it out and we make it look great. Trying to remove as much blue from the bottom as I can, and then we progressively have more as we work our way up. There we go. From there, we'll take a step back from our canvas. We'll grab some bonus titanium white, work that into our mix, then switch back on over to our filbert. We'll apply that to the base of these clouds yet again, and we'll continue to build those larger gradients of highlight that we've started establishing. And we have so much of this bright light in the central space that it'll really just connect, feel natural. We want a little bit less as we move towards the side, so I kind of do this as I start to run out of pigment, but the main emphasis is towards the center. There we go. Again, off to a really strong start. If we want, we can take a bit more of it and we can kind of interject it throughout here. Just hints of this pink highlight. That way, we're again bridging these areas nicely. There we go. Okay, so admittedly, we're deviating a little bit from the reference photo in that it's a bit more desaturated. These clouds are a bit brighter, they're less pink, but I really like what this added to the piece. I think it feels warmer than the reference photo, and I typically really like to add a lot of warmth into my pieces. I like them a little bit darker, but I like them warmer. I like when you look at them, you just feel like there's this cozy nostalgia to it. So I'm really happy with this. We do need to reintegrate some of the darker clouds that we have at the bottom a little bit higher up. Again, we're looking at bridging all of these steps right now. So we're going to head back into the palette. We're going to mix some of that darker pigment that we use for the very bottom, and we'll continue amalgamating, building depth, and just really making this something special. Now at this point, the blue on my palette is fully dry, which is good because of this color right here. I believe that's what we used for the base of our cloud. So we'll remix to that. I always like to leave a little bit of past subjects on my palette just for the sake of remixing when the time comes. And with this, again, it's a lot of Mars Black, Titanium White, Cad Red, a little bit of our yellow, but only once we've added a lot of that red, because again, we don't want the yellow and the black to turn into a green. That said, I think this is looking really nice, and I'm happy to test it. So we'll do a little test down here, make sure we get it right. And it's close, but you know what? I think we go a little bit brighter, so we'll interject some bonus titanium white into that. And now I love it. I think that's perfect. So we are going to resketch in a cloud that I had right here. And I left some of it just pure white on the canvas. So easy to find and reestablish. We also have some higher ones up here. Kind of a more unique shape for a cloud. There's a lot of building in it, which I like a lot. Though I don't want to just over here, again, very similar to this, but I think for the sake of building our sides together in unison, we'll do another one right over here, maybe a little smaller guy. We'll leave some openings for it. That'll be interesting. just like so. Maybe it'll have this area that kind of cuts out. Being relatively playful, but right now I'm just kind of blocking in these larger shapes and trying to figure out where I want everything. Now we'll get you a little bit closer. We'll switch to our liner brush, and again we did the blocking, we figured out where we wanted it. Now we're going in and we're just going to refine some of our edges, ensure that these are nice and sharp, that they protrude in the ways that we want. Have some good little steps, almost. You can see that. And if you want a softer sky, I'd recommend doing more rounded motions with your brush, kind of like this. But if you want it to be a bit more dramatic, then you go for more straight lines, like that. And neither of which are wrong, they just give you a different feel. You can also do multiple of them for the sake of diversity in your piece, and I think that's something I often lean towards, though if you really want to lean in one direction or the other, more than welcome to. That said, I really like these. I think we'll do some little protruding ones here and there. Those look good. Those look really good. Maybe a little bit more through there. Cast some additional lines. And again, this is where we really start to bring our subjects together. We breach those gaps of open canvas. We layer it over the oranges, but also over these nice peachy pinks. Lovely. Off to a strong start, I think. We can do some softer ones here and there. Once I start to run out of paint and it gets a little more semi-transparent. We don't have any in the middle, and I'm mildly apprehensive to do so because I don't want it to be too visually dramatic. So I think once I start to run out of paint, that's when I'll do it. You can see how this is a little bit less opaque than what we have here or there, but I think we do need them in the middle to the point so that it doesn't feel just too artificially framed. Again, you can just go off the reference photo. The reference photo, I think, is really well balanced, and the traceable is based off of the reference photo, so you can also base your clouds off of that, and I think they'll just be perfect. Again, I didn't draw them back on. I felt like I had an idea, but I am freestyling a little bit. But again, whatever makes you feel comfortable, that's really how you should be going about this. I said, I think I want one a bit higher. Trying to figure out where. I think over here. You can see I kind of draw on the canvas sometimes in the air above it, just for the sake of figuring things out. Highly recommend that. You don't actually make contact with the canvas, you just kind of visually put it there until you figure out what you desire. There we go. Good mixes. And then we can transition it into this bottom area by putting it on the tops of some of these, and then just let that water do a soft blend down, and that'll connect everything nicely. Now from there we do need to blend the light of the sun into what we just mixed, so we're going to make a more orange heavy mix. So bonus cad yellow deep hue because we want it warm, bonus cad red, titanium white, hint of Mars black just with the corner of the brush, and I'll do a little bit of a blend into our previous mix. That way we almost have this transitional mixture. We can grab from here or we can grab to the more dramatic end, but this will allow us to build highlights around the edges of our clouds that'll wrap light around them. And again, we have our good transition should we need it. Also, take a look at these guys out here. Pretty inspiring. Love when the real world can impact that which we're rendering on the canvas. Now I am going to go back in with the liner, some of that nice mid to bright value. I'll apply that to the base of these brand new clouds. And then we'll do a little blend upwards, rounded motion, using more of the body of that brush. And just like that, it's already fitting in a lot better with what we have down there. I'll head on over to the one on the left-hand side, do the same. Might splash some of that into the surrounding clouds, and you can see just how quickly this is all starting to come together. It's one of those things where we had our little warm-up period, we were figuring out where things went, but now we're well acquainted with the techniques, and we can just have a lot of fun putting paint on the canvas. We're at that point where it's just very rewarding. I think we'll also apply some of that to the base of these little guys. And when you do this, again, you want to make sure that you have a nice damp brush. That way you can get those bristles condensed and you can do the blends up very softly. Like so. We don't want any of it to look like just pure silhouettes. It could look like silhouettes, but it could also look a lot better than that. And that's what we're aiming for. We know we have the potential for real volume and something unique. So let's make it happen. Now we'll get a little closer. We'll take some bonus titanium white, work that into our mix, get a little bonus cad yellow deep hue. We'll run that along the bases of some of the larger clouds. Now that we have that orange base, this will go on a lot better. If we just applied this over the regular cloud, it might look a little green, but we can progressively go more and more yellow with every mix. We just want to start with something that's a bit more orange or red heavy, and that'll keep our mixes nice and safe from undesired changes in hue. There we go. I don't know about you, but I love painting clouds. Once you get started, it's just so much fun. If you're like me, you kind of have trouble starting sometimes, but just need to remind ourselves that we love the process, we love making things, love that which we do. There we go. All right, taking a step back, again, really loving it. And now I think we start playing up here. Again, the traceable has a lot of these, but I'm going to freestyle a little bit. I really like the pigment that we had there. I want it, but a little bit of a brighter version. So I'm going to start with our Mars Black Titanium White, our Cad Red, our Yellow Deep. We want it to be a bit more red heavy than yellow because we are putting it directly on top of blue, but I also want it to be more gray. So it's more red, but it's also more gray. Here you can see the initial, here you can see the new. I'm going to test it on top just to see what it looks like around, beside, etc. And I think it's good, but it could have a little bit more red. We don't always go with the first pigment we mix, and oh yeah, that's it, that's pretty. This is something I could throw in so many areas of the painting and just be very happy with. So from there, we are going to switch on over to our filbert brush. We'll make sure that's nice and damp. I'll grab some of this pigment, and I want to create some clouds that kind of bring us down and into the painting. So I'm going to start up here with these wispy little markings. You can see that. I'm going to make my brush nice and damp. I'm going to head back up. I'm going to use the corner of that brush to blend these out nice and soft. already. I love it. And for the record, if you're looking at all of these applications and you find your brushes aren't working the same, you can pick up the exact same brushes that I'm using in the video description. I do have a brush set. It's a 5-piece brush set, and I use it for all the lessons here on the channel. So if you like doing these lessons, all you have to do is pick up that one set and you'll be ready for all of them. There we go. Let's do a couple more in here. I'm going to make this nice and soft. Nice and soft, nice and soft. You can barely see it, but that's just kind of how I'm testing. If I like it, then I'll commit to a little bit more pigment. Then I'll soften with a bit of water. And we're painting all wet and to dry. Everything here, fully dry to the touch right now. And it's actually been really, really nice. We can do a bit of this cloud on top of our pink cloud, like so, creating additional layers of depth. Our clouds are going to overlap in many ways in many spaces, so it makes sense that we have some here. A lot of it's still moving down in this direction. A lot of my brush strokes are pushing us towards the sun for the sake of great leading lines. Double down on some of these clouds just because I really, really do like them in this space. And again, we do have the traceable if you need it, but I think we're doing a good job. We're figuring it out. I really like this and I really like this. I kind of want a connective cloud in between. Yeah, just like that. See how those all work together now? Maybe we do another over here. It's starting to get complicated. I think if you just looked at an image of this, it'd be a little daunting, but we've seen it come together. We know how we layer it. We know that there are ways of making it not too tricky. There we go. Going over the middle areas of ones that I really like. We can do a bigger cloud up here. We don't want there to be too much negative space on the top. We want to let the painting breathe a little bit, but I think it makes sense that we also have some additional clouds up here too. There we go. Now this can transition to this, and this can transition to this. Beautiful. So now we're taking a step back, and I'm just talking with my partner, also an artist, about where we want to put these. We're talking about extending this one up a little bit higher, like that, so it's kind of reaching off of the canvas, making this one a little bit bigger, maybe combining it with this one. And where else do you think?
I think here has really nice flow. I think here we can soften this kind of like section between the pink and the blue, so maybe just like right
through here.
Yeah,
in that same motion,
just in the same direction, just to like break it up a bit.
Okay, start with something soft.
Yeah,
kind of bridge the pinks into the blues.
My art professor said if you're struggling on where to put specific things on a painting,
yeah,
you have to take like a few steps back and kind of squint your eyes. You can kind of figure out what's standing out, what areas in your painting need work. So it's a lot of like, kind of like ruminating with it.
Great tip. I always advocate for painting with mirrors.
Yeah.
For that same idea. It allows you to look at the painting from really far away, even when you're close to it. So taking those steps back, big, important, finding ways to create that separation. I agree, I think this worked really well.
Yeah. It's got really great flow, because like, we've got this kind of whoosh down here, and then these clouds are more horizontal, so you go back in, and eventually you'll have the boat, so will lead you down, and so there's a rhythm to it.
A lot of leading lines, yeah. I feel like all of these kind of point us down in the painting, bring us towards the sun, towards the boat. If the eye wanders over here, it's just pushed back this way. So we're constantly moving the viewer's eye down and towards the center of the painting.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
And we're just figuring out different ways of applying clouds to help us with that larger idea. I think I really like all of our darker ones.
Yeah.
Though, I think the top right-hand corner, and I can see this in the reference photo, will actually be better aided by Cad Red, a little bit of Cad Yellow Deep, but mostly Cad Red, a lot of Titanium White, mixing more of that like peachy hue that we had. Just like that. Do a little test, make sure it's cohesive with our past peachy hues. I think you could use a little bit more Titanium White. If you're ever not sure about a mix and you have something similar on your canvas, just doing a little tap, a little dot, can be a great way of confirming ideas. But once we have that, I think we'll go up here. And again, I can just see this in the reference photo. It's really pretty. It's just this one really unique looking cloud. You know, I say one, there's a second one right here, but we can do a couple. Now we're bringing some of those paints from the bottom up. It's unique.
Mm-hmm.
Might reapply some of this highlight down here.
Oh, that's pretty. I like that.
And I'm kind of moving it in a lot of different spaces. That way this is cohesive with everything else, just in case this is a little bit different. Again, I tried it looked really close, and I like that. Also, this much brighter right now than it will be. It's going to dry. Acrylics dry a little bit darker, and this with a blue, dark blue background certainly will. So at this point, I think I'm quite happy with the sky, and I think we're just about ready for the next step. No, you know me. Impossible to put down a brush. So again, taking a step back, I think I'm really happy with it. There are always additional details, additional highlights, this and that we can do, and when we have more of the painting established, we will go back up to the top and heighten some of those. But for now, I'm very happy. I think this is a great start to the painting, and I also think the sun is setting. So I think this is where we put down our brushes for the day. Tomorrow we'll jump into the water and we'll have it come together. We'll do a beautiful reflection, but I think this is a great place to call it. So I will see you tomorrow with a fun new subject.
Beautiful sunset clouds.
Hey there, welcome back. So, looking at the sky, I'm a big fan. I think we did a great job. I think there are things we could definitely go back and touch up, but at this point, I'm very happy with it. So we are going to progress downwards here in the painting, and we're going to start with the sand right through here because we need to layer the water on top of it. I know we're excited about the water. I know we're excited about the reflection. I am too, but if we do this first, it'll make this section a lot easier and we can get these really neat transparent blends between the water and the sand. So this is step number one. I also really like the idea of starting with sand because it is a bit simpler, gives us a chance to practice our mixing, get those fine motor skills firing, and then we can get into something that is a lot more detailed like the water. And having those entry stages to your painting sessions can really make you a lot more confident when you do jump into the more complicated pieces. That said, let's jump into the palette and get our first mix going. Now the sand is going to be quite dark. So we'll start with the Mars Black. We'll add some titanium white. In the reference photo, the sand is essentially fully covered in water. Ours is not going to be. It's going to be partially, just so it's a bit more dynamic. And I want more of a sandy color. So I'll grab some red. I'll grab some of our Cad Yellow Deep Hue. That's going to start to transition this into a bit more of an orange. And when the orange is as dark as it is here, it looks like a really great sandy color. Now let's make a second mix, even darker, and between the two of these, we can get a great gradient. Okay, so jumping into this, I'm going to apply that really dark mixture that we had to both the right and the left corners. Then I'll drag it right along the bottom of the canvas. That way we have this vignette going on. Might even drag it slightly up into the water, getting the sides of the canvas, the bottom, and then we'll switch on over to our brighter mix. We'll apply that right above. Then we'll do a soft blend from one into the next, using very little pressure on our brush. We can even brighten it up. More titanium white, more of our Naples yellow. I say Naples yellow. This is a cadmium yellow deep hue. Used to using a lot of Naples yellows in these sunsets, but wanted to do something a bit different. We'll put that right across, and then yet again, just a soft blend in. And the goal is to render a gradient from a lighter sand, because this will be wet, it'll be reflective, it'll catch more light, to our darker sand on the edge and the corners. Make sure you do 2 layers, that way it's nice and thick. All right, we're off to a great start. Now we're going to take some frog tape, apply this to our horizon so we can get a really clean water application on the horizon, and then we can mix for the next step. And with patience and precision, just get a really clean application. Now for the water, we want 2 mixes, one of which is going to be a little bit brighter. We are using our titanium white, our ultramarine blue, and Mars Black. It's not going to be that bright, but it will be brighter relative to what we have here, and that's going to give us an opportunity to see some extra blue in it, like so. This will be for the back of our horizon, where we don't have that much contrast. And in the foreground, we want something akin to this, and you know, we can even just move some of this mix over, grab more Mars Black, and create something quite a bit more dramatic. Just like that. So they're similar mixes, but one is certainly darker, and maybe even a little more blue saturated. All right, so again, in the background here, we're going to go with the lighter of the 2 mixes, and I'm going to apply that quite generously over the horizon. I'm not going to worry about going over the reflection because we can just resketch that in fairly simply, though I will be a bit more wary of the boat. And we'll start moving this pigment down until we get to about that halfway point in the painting. I'm applying more pressure with my brush to get a larger application. I'm trying to get a lot of thick pigment on that canvas as well. It's one of those things where if you really just keep dragging it, eventually you thin it, and that's happening here. So in that scenario, we go back, we grab more pigment, and then we continue to fulfill that base. I'm also making a lot of horizontal strokes, even on the edges where you might want to craft around it, just in case there are lines that show through. Then, as we get towards the bottom, we'll grab our darker mix. I'm going to apply that underneath this, not only technically, but also I'm not letting it touch just yet, because I don't want to dilute the darker pigment with a brighter pigment on one side and then have the other side be effectively brighter. That said, once we come towards the edge here, yet again, I'm not going to let it touch that. I'm just going to get it close And then we're going to head up to the middle and we'll start connecting them. We'll do that through an X-shaped pattern. That way we get a smooth transition. Moves pigment not only left and right, but up and down. And then we go back to a horizontal stroke to smooth it all out and make sure that if there are any brush strokes, they are moving this way. That's important because our water as a whole will be moving that way. Then I'll grab a mix of the two, and it's going to get a little bit brighter right before we get to the shoreline because the water gets thinner and more light can pass through it. So apply that right in front. Try not to mix it too much, but that will be inevitable. There we go. And then we'll do a soft little blend. Make sure it's even. You can barely see the difference between the mid, the dark, and then the mid, but those subtleties do help. And we'll grab a little bit more of that highlight with a fairly wet brush. And we can just start working that along the edge of the sand. By making it wet, we have the sand show through, which is really nice. And then I'm going to get a little bit of water off my brush, but I don't want any actual paint on the brush. I just want it to be leftover water and leftover pigment. And then we can just work some of that water forward. In the reference photo, all of this was covered in water. I don't really want that. I want some of it, but I want it to be more diverse, a bit more unique. So we're just going to leave openings like that. Soften a lot of it. That way it feels like it's progressively moving up here. And now we have this transition from sand to watery sand and then into water. We're going to really brighten up elements of this, but we're going to do that a little bit later when it comes time to adding the reflections in the water. Great start though. And now we get to do that very cathartic rip. Nice and clean. All right, once that's done, we're going to take a little bit of a break, let it dry. We'll head back into our palette and we'll start mixing some mid values so that we can apply some waves in the background, in the midground, the foreground, and really start making this look a bit more unique. Now, for our first set of highlights, we're actually just making some mid values. We'll build it up slowly, but we have our past brighter pigment for the water, and we'll use that as a guide because we want something brighter than that, but not by too much. So it's a lot of titanium white, Mars black, more ultramarine blue than last time. And already I like where we're going, though I think I want to desaturate it just a little bit more with some titanium white. You could start leading it into a purple with a cad red, and I might grab just the smallest hint of that, but I really don't want much. I think the majority of those color transitions will be done with washes later on. So as you can see, I've resketched the traceable markings, and I'm going to go in here with the liner brush, start mapping out where some of these initial highlights are going to work. The easiest place to start adding them is right under your greatest reflection. So for us, that's the sun. It's going to be casting the most light. In the distance, I'm making very small markings. As we get closer to us, they get a little bit bigger. And then towards the midground, we really extend them out. And then we start creating actual waves or portions of them. So these are areas that aren't just horizontal, they have a bit of a bend. You can see the water moving like so. I like that. I like that a lot. Let's get you a little bit closer though. So with this, again, we're going to look at the pre-existing lines and we'll start there. Try to make the edges of these applications sharper, and the bodies of them thicker. So here you can see that midpoint quite thick. The corner looks like a corner. It gets more tapered. This is a great way of making sure that your waves and this moving water never looks blocky. Just try to make those edges nice and sharp. Here we go. Really easy start. We're essentially just doubling down on our initial sketch, like so. We could do dramatic waves, and we've done that in paintings before, but this time I think we'll go with something a bit more subtle. Just do a couple up here, close to our boat. It's pretty watery, that way it's semi-transparent and doesn't leave too dramatic of a marking. Now with this, we do want to double down on the areas and the lines that we really like. So I'll go into this midsection because I think it's a good place to practice. And then from this larger area, I'm going to create little lines that go up and this way. And they're going to start in the wave, and then as we get farther back from it, we'll continue them, leaving little bits of space. And this is going to create the look of movement in a lot of our water. Now we'll do it from here too. So I create those lines initially. From it, and then we space out backwards, and eventually they become more and more horizontal as you move up, like so. And this is a great way of painting very calm water. I think we have a calm sky, I think we have a calm sailboat, and I think the water in this one makes sense as being equally relaxed. The more we do of this, the more it starts to be cohesive, blend, and really make sense. We can also start incorporating that out into the negative space. That's a good start. So yet again, we are nice and up close. Might double down on some of those pre-existing lines that we really liked. Because we are working with acrylics, it is quite damp, and that means that all of our lines aren't going to be truly opaque. Some of them are going to be a lot softer. So now we're going in, finding that which really deserves the more prominent looks. And then we'll start tapping this on. As we get towards this mid ground, we're going to just do a lot of horizontal taps, as well as taps in general. And we're filling out the space, making sure that it feels like these highlights don't just exist in the larger waves or in the primary zones, because they will exist everywhere. Then as you get higher up, we move to these larger horizontal applications. As we move downwards, we move into more specific water highlights. You can see how these are kind of wrapping around here, but then also wrapping around the shoreline itself. So the waves are constantly changing and progressing. It's one of those things where I always get asked the question, how do you paint waves? How do you paint water? How do you paint this subject, that subject? And the answer is always, there's 100 ways to paint all of them. It really depends on the setting, the wind, the lighting, how far away it is, what other subjects is it interacting with. There's just so many pieces to what a subject looks like and why it looks that way in each individual setting, and you just need to articulate the setting, the mood, the atmosphere, how it all comes together. And that's really what we're doing right now. Letting my applications get a little more watery and less prominent towards the edges because I want that vignetting effect. And we'll just work these up. Work a little bit of this outward. Less taps towards the edges. We're also moving farther and farther away from this light, so we're not going to see it as prominently. Now, I spent quite some time in this foreground, and I am going to, again, double down on the areas that I really like towards the center, make sure they really pop from a distance, have you a bit farther away now so that we can kind of put this together from a distance. However, I do also want to hop into that background once I've established enough of this to kind of let it be for a second. And then in the background, we lose those details. We get horizontal markings. A lot of them are going to cut through the central area because that's where we have the most light. But we want these to be very small, just hints. And then we can work out to the side. When I accidentally render ones that are a bit too large, I try to just blend them out, make them look a little bit softer. And these are making the painting look significantly more full. Everything in the middle is now feeling more cohesive than it did. That's really important. Most of these markings just end up being water on the canvas, so they don't end up drying as anything, but they give me an idea of what I want, where I want it. It also gives us an opportunity to play with those strokes. It, if left, gives you the smallest amount of subtle pattern, which is really nice. So I just do a lot of these markings, recognizing we're not really going to see most of them. Ones we do see is great. Ones that we don't see, we continue to not see, and we double down on the ones that we like. You can see that I could just do this forever. One of those very cathartic processes. There we go. All right, so looks like we have a good dark base in there. Now it's time to do what we really want to do in the reflections, and that's add highlight. So we're going to build some brighter, warmer pigments on our palette, and then we'll start interjecting those over the base, which we just laid in the water. Now for a highlight, I think I actually want something akin to the sand, which I believe might be this pigment. So I'm going to mix to something akin to that, using our Cad Red, our Cad Yellow Deep, Titanium White. Of course, we need to darken it, so hint of Mars Black. I don't know if we'll use our Ultramarine Blue in this mix, but I'm going to keep that option open. And already I can tell this is getting closer to our sand, and that's what we wanted for our first application. We don't want it to be the brightest pigment, we don't want it to be the saturated, or the most saturated pigment, but we do want it to look great on top of this. So it can't look too different, but it also, it's a completely different palette in a different direction. I think this is it. If you look at these two together, this one is a natural build on that value-wise. They're very similar, but it is warm and I think it'll sink in nicely. So the easiest way to test if your color is correct is to take a little bit of it and then drop that into your sand and just see how cohesive they look. I think that this is a little bit more saturated than my sand, but I am okay with that. It's very close. And with it, we are going to head up to our top reflection, as we've done before. Make those horizontal markings over top a lot of the pre-existing highlights, using those as essentially a pre-sketch for what we are currently applying. You can see I'm even applying it out to the more horizontal markings that we have. But I want to keep the majority of this, at least initially, towards the center of the painting. But it is the highlight of the sun coming down, catching the rising portions of water, and giving us a beautiful new pigment. I think it's also important to note that we really are just getting started with this pigment. What we are going to add is going to be significantly brighter, significantly more saturated, but we can't apply yellows over blue or we'll get a green, and this is going to give us a nice warm base to apply those yellows to. So we're just setting ourselves up for success and ensuring that our future mixes on the canvas are going to look appropriate. Until then, we can just enjoy building these sandy, peachy, sunlight hues onto our pre-existing highlights. You can see I'm doing it on the rim of the water, letting it dissipate as we move towards the edge, and I'm also building it up slightly. You can do hints of it on the edges, but again, I want the majority of it in those nice central spaces. Then these are going to be fairly dramatic in highlight, so we'll go over most of them. It's really reassuring doing this with that base, because if we didn't have it, we'd be questioning if we were putting these in the right area, and it's a much more dramatic look than the blue. So we could kind of mess up on the blue here and there, and it's not a big deal because it just sinks into the other blue. Where this one would be much more noticeable, and I think we're having a great impact. So now we'll take a step back. I'll actually head to the larger flat-headed brush, my palette, interject some extra titanium white into our mix, a little bit of extra cad yellow, cad red. You can see we're mixing up more of an orange, but I want it to be peachy. I do want a little bit more of that yellow. And I think this is a great next color. So let's get in close up here and continue painting. I love these close-up shots because that sky just looks so pretty. We'll grab some of that highlight, head right under the sun, and with real precision, detail work, intentionality, we start bringing in those highlights. We can double down on some of those pre-existing ones to the sides, but the more we build into our highlight, the more we want to emphasize the middle, because this looks more and more dramatic every time we build it up. We have that very dark outskirts, that base, and the contrast just gets more and more dramatic. So we're trying to be very cautious with the highlights. That's why we do it in so many applications and layers. We don't just go to this bright color. We could have, but it would have been far more risky. Here you can see I'm going over past applications numerous times. As I run out of paint, I get this more soft variant, and that's actually very useful for testing, but also giving the edges something without making it over dramatic, and then the centers are much brighter. Do a couple little highlights here and there. Soften them. Okay. Off to a great start. Let's take a little bit of a step back and just make sure that it's looking good. So as we step back, there's a real look again at how this all works with the sand that we have. And I think so far the colors are really lovely together. So I will continue to double down on that which is working. And that is this pigment. It's starting to come alive, these highlights. Starting to run out of paint, so I'll go towards the edges, get some more of these farther shots, but areas that will still have that great light. Head on into here. And a lot of these, because it's so close, I'm not actually going to do a line. I'm going to do little taps that will form a line. It's kind of like pointillism. There we go. I like that. I like that a lot. Lots of little taps to the background. Also, we keep doing all of these taps on the edges and the ends. Don't forget that we did incorporate these beautiful little details in front of it, and that they deserve highlight as well. Already, I think it's starting to come together highlight-wise. We need to change the hue, and we need to diversify things pretty dramatically. But as far as the form and the contrast, I think we're already entering a good place. Now the next step is a fairly dramatic one, and we're going to grab our smaller flat-headed brush. We'll make sure it's nice and clean with clean water. We'll grab some of that mix that we've been working with. I'll move it to a clean spot on our palette, make it very watery to the point where it's just like watercolor, similar to how we did the wash up there, because we're doing a wash down here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start more so towards the middle. Going to create a nice line, work it out towards the sides, create another one, up towards the actual sun, and then starting in the back, because I want an area to practice essentially. We'll take the rest of the pigment off our brush, make sure it's just watery, and we'll clean this up towards the edges. Make sure we don't have a hard stop point. And this is going to start bridging our colors in a way that we haven't before. Now my hand is occasionally in front of the canvas. I do apologize for that, but one of those things where just to get that right application, sometimes I have to. As you move more so into the foreground, we're going to build this off of pre-existing waves. So whenever I have that highlight in front, I'll grab some of this and I'll just follow it to the edges. Then soft blends upwards, keeping the bottom relatively sharp. You can see it's very subtle at this point. We'll build it in the more prominent areas, back and forth. There we go. Let's get you a little bit closer. I think this area towards the front is pretty important. So we'll do a big splash here. I'll get some of that extra pigment off of my brush on the outskirts, like so. You can start combining those highlighted areas. It's always a good look. Nice and cohesive. Blend this back with a little bit of water, a little bit of extra water that is. Trying to keep the areas right under our waves a bit darker. That's why we're only blending upwards, we're not blending downwards. Easy way to build very subtle connective values. There we go. And the more we add, the less dramatic the water will look. That said, all of our highlights are starting to blend in with this, and we want our highlights to stand out. So once we're done this, we go back to our highlights and we rebuild them. Brighter, more saturated, and more diverse than before. All right, so again, I think we have a really good base. I like how it's building. I think it's natural. And now I think we have enough red on the canvas that we can apply yellows quite a bit more safely. So we're going to head into more yellow heavy oranges, maybe get into some actual yellows in our palette, and we'll just build from there. So this, again, was the color we were just working with. Not that bright, not that saturated, not that yellow. And we can go back in over top of it. It's essentially dry, so I'm not really mixing with it at this point. It's just underneath as a good reference. I'll add some extra titanium white, hint of Mars black, just a little bit. You can see I have a lot on my brush. That would darken this dramatically, and we don't want that. So we'll just do a little bit, double down on my yellow, double down on my red, and just like that. I think we have a good next step. Though eventually we are building to essentially this. So we have a long ways to go. So we'll pick up the liner, make sure it's nice and damp, grab some of that beautiful warm pigment, head on up to the very top here, work that in these horizontal strokes we've become oh so familiar with. Try to apply this exclusively over our previous highlights. If we put it over the blue, it's just going to look probably a little bit muddy, maybe a little bit green. It's just not going to have the look that we want. So this is where we become even more intentional. We've had multiple practice rounds to put this down in the areas that we think it should be. And now we're committing with the much more dramatic color. Let me get you a bit closer though. And just looking at this shot, I'm already very excited about what the painting is turning into. We've got so much potential here. And we just keep making it look better and better. There we go. like that. Get some good taps along the edges. Remember, as we move into the foreground, these areas to the front of our waves are done for the most part in taps, not drags. And that's just going to give them this nice sparkle, nice speckled look. If you're working on a much bigger canvas, you can incorporate a lot more detail, but I'm very happy with how it's looking. We'll really try to make good use of this in the foreground. The closer we get, the more detail we can incorporate because it's closer to us and the eye can just pick up on more of it when we are this close. Trying to stay on previous highlights for the most part. There we go. Now let's also start taking some of that and working it into our sand and reflections down here in the water. That's overlapping little portions of our sand. So we're just dragging that out, and here we are getting a bit more of that green, though I am okay with it. I think on a sand, it just makes more sense. I'll drag this out. If you get a little bit of that gritty look from the canvas in these wispy strokes, I think that's also a great addition. It looks like sand. Gets that textural grit. Leaving little openings here and there in between these strokes. There we go. And then yet again, we're getting nice and close. Build up those highlights time and time again. Double down on that which we feel is working well. I feel like a lot of it's working really well. So we get to paint with real confidence here. Well, that's fun. Really starting to get a good glow on the sand. That's really the look we want for a lot of this, is that glow. There we are. Then we'll do little taps with this highlight in the water, in the foreground. Beautiful little textures. We don't need to fully fill it, but here and there, especially around the outskirts, can be really nice. Just little rocks or pieces of sand, water that catch extra light, shine in the darkness. And then the areas in the middle here, for the most part, are expected and blended. Make it all feel natural. All right, now we'll take a step back. We'll grab some of our bonus yellow, titanium white, mix that up. Still an orange, but a very yellow dominant orange at this point. Something we can still get even brighter, but this is going to be fantastic for, yet again, continuing to build those highlights predominantly through these central portions of our waves, and that is where I'm starting. I'm starting on the central portions. We might be able to move this to the sides, especially as it starts to run out of actual pigment on our brush and it becomes more watery, but I don't want to risk it. I want to start in the middle and make this something wonderfully stark, wonderfully lively. Give it an abundance of personality. Make it special. You really want to make the viewer feel like they were there. Bring them to a memory where they were looking at a sunset like this. Where they were out on the beach and it was just one of those days you look at and you never forget. It's special. Let's get you a little bit closer. So yet again, picking up more of that good sharp pigment. You can see, almost see the texture on the canvas from it. I'm applying a great deal because I want it to be nice and opaque. And in the process, sometimes the paint is actually lifted from the canvas. It's very thick. With acrylics, it's typically difficult, but we are working with a lot of titanium white, and that's innately a very thick pigment. Lends itself well to building little bits of texture, even when difficult with the medium. Now we're in the foreground. This is where it really matters. We've had our practice in the back, in the midground. Now we're really bringing it in. Love these separative markings. Trying to leave bits of the last layer showing through on the edges. So this is predominantly in the central portions. And I think that's really nice for creating extra depth in the color. There we go. Unless I want some here, some on the sand. Being careful with it though, because it is a very bright pigment relative to that which we have. We don't want to overdo it early on. We can slowly build it up, but the first strokes are quite measured. All right, so at this point, we have some great highlights. We have a great base for it. We can definitely go brighter, especially in that middle section. Though as we build out the contrast, I realized that I also want to add more dramatic washes to the left and right hand side, build out some of the paints that we also have in the sky. That way it mirrors it well and it all feels really nice and cohesive. Our sky as a whole has a lot of washes on it, so the contrasts aren't too high. We need to make sure that the bottom's similar, so there's still quite a few steps to this, but we're going to continue breaking it down, making sure that it's nice and simple. I think that a piece like this has essentially 3 subjects, all of which we innately think of as very complicated, but when we do break them down, they become manageable and even really exciting to put it all together. So we do have quite a few stages left. They're all fun. They're all going to make it look a lot better. And we're going to do that tomorrow because it's almost 12 at night and I want to make sure that I go into the wash nice and fresh. I practice on a different canvas, but I think that we have a great base. I am really excited to get to it, but I want to make sure we do it right. So I'm going to head to bed and I will see you in the morning. Hey, love.
Morning.
Good morning. Don't mind the bed head. Got up, decided, you know what, we are just going to start with painting today. I'm excited. I think we ended last night in a really strong spot. And again, I do I want to do a glaze. I want to really brighten up that base. I want to add some color. And I think that's the first step. So let's jump into the palette and start bringing some beautiful pinks and more peachy colors down to the water. So for our first application, we want a nice peachy, maybe a little bit of a purpley color, relatively desaturated, relatively mid-valued. So I'll grab quite a bit of our Cad Red, mix our Ultramarine blue in there, and it's already starting to turn it to more of a deep purple. Let's brighten it. Titanium white, desaturate it. Mars black. And already I really like where this is going. I think it could be a little bit brighter because we're playing it over a dark base, and this is going to be a lot darker on the canvas than it is on the palette. It's important to remember that what you're mixing here isn't actually what you get on the canvas. You get this and a combination of what's under it, even if what's under it is dry, because these are semi-transparent and you do see those colors through. That said, I think I like this a lot. I'm just going to test a little bit of Naples yellow over here. I said Naples yellow. It's cadmium yellow, deep hue. But I just want to see what this looks like. I think a lot of color mixing is about exploring. And you know what? I really like that too. I think that's the color. Let's interject some extra yellow into the rest and head on over to the canvas. All right, so while we're going to do a wash with this, I also want to start with the smaller liner brush, and I want to tap in a transitional orange, peachy orange I suppose, to the left and right hand side of all of this water. I think that giving it that bonus texture long term is going to make it feel a lot more natural. We didn't want just texture in these really built up highlights. We want it throughout the painting. So we'll just do a little bit more with that first. If we did our wash, then our canvas would be quite wet, and this might not be as visual, as notable as we want it to be. It might just blend in too much. So we'll start there, and then again, we're just grabbing some good thick pigment, doing these dots with little bits of a drag. That way it still moves like water. We have a good amount on the other side, so I want to match that. And we're not applying it in the middle. This is purely to the left and the right of the middle. The middle is still going to be that brighter, more yellow mix. There we go. Love that. Off to a great start. Now let's let it fully dry, and we can go in with the wash. All right, so things are pretty much dry to the touch. We can switch over to our smaller flat-headed brush. I like this because it will allow us to grab a good amount of paint, but also cut nice sharp edges. We'll move a bit of that pigment to a clean area of our palette. It's the next day for me, so pretty much everything's clean, but I'll make a very watery mix right here. And then I'm going to do essentially what I was just doing, but with line work. So I go to the back, I kind of connect it to the yellow on the side, and then we drag outwards. And we can create these different strips. We want it to be more opaque towards the center, and then as we get towards the outskirts, we just let that paint dissipate. We can grab a bit more of that thick pigment, because I also want to create some line work out here. And then eventually we might have them start to combine, and I'll do that through little taps. This should all be pretty subtle in your first application of it, So it's not something dramatic or set in stone. It's very soft. At least initially. And here we can see one side versus the other. You can see which you prefer. If you want it to be more stark, you do less of the wash. If you want it more stark, you do more of the wash. I think the boat here has a bit of a shadow in the water, so I'm actually going to pick this up on the other side. Like so. Very good. And we can bring that upwards as well. Now, because we've used it on the left-hand side, means we can also use it over here on the right-hand side. Now I'm building it up much more dramatically. Make a bit of a more dramatic wash. Leaving openings, just softening a lot of this very dark application. I love how we have those deep blues in there still, but we are brightening it so that it matches the sky a little bit more. Just like that. Very good. Now we have a base starting to look a little bit messy, and that's okay. I'm going to make my mix slightly brighter, more titanium white. It'll desaturate, so I'll throw in a bit more of our cad red, but I do want to brighten this a little bit, like so. And then I am going to switch back to the liner, where yet again, from that central spot, we've already made a lot of taps. We're going to make more taps. We're going to start bringing it out. And this is where we create texture in those washes. So it's a bunch of minute taps, like so, that are going to add a lot of life and texture to these areas that might have felt a little too simple prior to these applications. So we have a lot of open negative space that just have brush strokes, and now they are also going to have these slight movements in water, these speckles of light. If you do it while that wash is still wet, you can get very, very, very subtle markings because you're essentially blending into very pre-existing wet backgrounds. But you can also go for something a bit more dramatic if you wait. There isn't a right or wrong, it's really just personal preference and how you want yours to look. There we go. And from there, I think we'll switch our brush. Here, for the first time this lesson, I'm going to grab my stiff bristled fan brush. You can see all of these strong impressions we can make. This will render, 30 different taps within one tap. Great for minute details, and all of these little bristles are smaller than that which you can get with a liner brush. So this is how you get the most fine detail and some great randomization. We want both of those, so we're not going to wet this. If we do, it'll condense our bristles. We'll have 5 or 6 markings rather than 30, but we're going to jump in with this and add some real highlights. So you do want to make sure that the pigment that you have on your palette is spread out really thin. You don't want to pick up a lot of paint with this brush, otherwise it will condense your bristles. We'll just grab a little bit on both sides, and then we'll go in with a series of little taps. And already it looks like magic. Just goes on so quick and easy. Those details are minute, smaller markings than we've been able to achieve with any other brush by a lot. I let it kind of dissipate as we move towards the right-hand side. So there are just less markings, less taps. And I also am trying to keep a lot of the separative shadows. But this is going to make a lot of those not so clean lines look a lot more clean. It's also worth noting that if you're looking for a fan brush just like this, I do have my brush set in the video description. I use it for all the lessons here on this channel. So if you get that brush set, you know that you're all set for this lesson and every other one you decide to do from here. It's a 5-piece brush set. There aren't a lot in there, but I really didn't want to sell you brushes you weren't going to use. So we stuck to the essentials and just what I like to use personally. This is also a pretty diverse brush in that it is a stiff bristled fan brush, but if we make it wet, the bristles condense very nicely and we get those 5 or 6 larger markings, great for rendering really quick and easy foliage. So if you've been looking for a new brush set, it's in the description. But with that, I really like the detail that we have here. We definitely need to incorporate it on the other side. So that's where we're going next. I'm going to let it lessen as we move into the path of the boat because we do want that to have shadows, but we could also go over it with a wash later and just darken it. And that might be the play. I think that's the play. We'll add a little bit of this in there as I start to run out of pigment. I think that's going to render the best image. And again, apologies if occasionally my hand is in the way. One of those things where we need to apply this in a very direct, intentional manner, and sometimes the camera doesn't work in accordance with that. But I am trying, and I will continue to try. Okay. Already looking a lot better. Now we'll take a real step back, and I do think that lightening this as a whole is helping it connect with that dramatically, but we're not there yet. So now we'll grab some of our cad yellow deep hue, some of our titanium white, hint of our cad red, but really not a lot. Switch on over initially to our liner. Apply some of these highlights to the center, and we've already done this here before, but I want to break them out and layer them slightly over our pinks, because right now our pinks and our oranges are overlapping the yellow, and it needs to be the other way around. This light is going to be working its way over those, and it'll just look a lot more correct once we start to implement this detail. So let me get you a little bit closer and we'll do that together. So again, looking at this, you can see how right here it's yellow and then it's pink. We need more of a transitional space. So we'll tap those yellows in. I'll re-interject them in the middle just to make sure that that's still by far our brightest point, just in case this yellow is a little brighter or more saturated than what we have in that central spot. Again, reintroducing it into the center, and we can use some of that residual pigment out here. I'm going in with the liner brush right now because I want incredibly intentional markings, but we will switch our brush momentarily. Because while these markings are great and intentional, they're not as small and sharp as they could be. For that, we really do need the fan brush. But already I like our transitions. I think they're looking good. It should go on nicely because we don't have to worry about it turning into a green. We have a lot of reddish orange bases for that yellow to sit on top of safely. There we go. All right, so again, taking a step back, I really like it, and I think it's time that we jump into some dramatic highlights in that water. So let's head back into the palette and mix something nice and bright. So with this, we are going with our titanium white, we are going with our cad yellow deep hue. If you really want it bright and saturated, you go with the cad yellow medium hue, but I think this is a proper starting point. And I want to make sure this is nice and thick. I want to be able to grab a lot of pigment with my brush because I don't want it to be semi-transparent. That's part of the reason we're using so much titanium white. It's a thick pigment, and this paired with the liner will be perfect. Okay, so I have my liner. It is damp, though we don't want a lot of water on it because again, we want really thick applications. I'm going to apply this to that very top spot and then do nice little taps of light. When we first did these markings in the background, we did predominantly horizontal lines, lots of little ones. This time, however, I'm just going in with taps. And I'm making them horizontal so that it follows that general movement, the applications which we've previously instilled, but I want more detail, I want a shimmer. We have our strong base for it, and now it's about committing the shine. And I wanted you to be a bit farther away so you could see the variance, but I think I'm going to get you quite a bit closer so you can see the detail. So jumping back into this, I'm going to try to make this a fairly consistent line downwards. I know sometimes when I paint from an angle and I'm filming, because when I film I have to paint kind of diagonally, these lines can kind of go zigzag. So if I'm doing that by accident, I'll fix it later, probably off camera, just so I can be properly in front of the canvas. But if that's happening, recognize that that's not something for you to copy. That's just a consequence of filming painting. That said, we want it to be nice and straight. We want these to progressively work their way down as they are. I'm using very little water. I'm not pressing my brush into the canvas with any real dramatic pressure. And we want to keep it as pressureless as possible for the sake of making sure it's nice and thick. The more we press in, the more we space out our paint. And that's just not what we're looking to do right now. And then towards the foreground, we can get a bit more unique with our design. I kind of have these rolling forward, like so. And we'll do some nice, more dramatic taps through there. I like that. I like that a lot. Okay. So far, so good. Might spread this out a bit more towards the foreground. Might interject a hint of that light in here. Do our best to do it towards the center. Blend it off. Okay, so we'll take a step back, and already I think that added so much to the painting, and it's only going to get better. Now, let's grab more titanium white, build that up, head back to the liner, make sure it's not too wet, but nice and condensed. We head to the top, right under that sun. We tap on an even brighter highlight, Make sure that the past applications are dry, but this is going to go in the middle of your past bright applications. We still want some of those yellow ones we just made to show up, but this is going to be there at the center of them. And this is that real glow. Oh, that's gorgeous. This is what we've been waiting to build to. There's also still a lot we can do in the water, but this did so much. Now we'll head back in with some of that yellow highlight. Work that towards the edges. Make sure that we just have a nice build up to that almost titanium white in the middle. It's not quite a titanium white, but it's definitely in that direction. There we go. Really like where this is going. Now I think we need to add some blues back in. And that's a bit more of a unique application. It's not just building highlights. At least not in the center and on the reflections. Actually, you know what, before that, let's just grab a bit more of that yellow and let's tap some little sparkles out in the water. Just make this a bit more cohesive with the rest of the piece. We don't want really big ones, and if they are too big, we can just kind of tap to the point where they get smaller. Might add some extras along the edge here with a very watery application, that way it's not as dramatic, but it's still showing some level of highlight. And I think I like that a lot. It's a little addition, but I think it went a long way. Lots of taps. There we go. Quota. If you're not spilling paint, you're not painting passionately enough, you know? Now, this area of my palette's fully dry, so I'm going to just mix right on here. We want a blue mix. We want it to be very desaturated. We want it to be a mid to dark value. So I'll start with kind of this mid to dark gray. We'll slowly interject ultramarine blue into it, but this is going to be essentially a highlight for the waves on the left and right hand side, which don't get as much light over here, but we still want a little bit of light. So maybe we'll interject just a hint more titanium white. The goal though is to render something very desaturated. We want it to be more of a gray than a blue with a touch of blue. And that's how it'll integrate properly. All right, so we are going to take this, we're going to look for these darker lines which we have interjected, these breaking points in our highlights, especially towards the edges. And we'll just tap these on until we get to those midpoints. So yet again, I'm going on top of that line and I'm working my way in until I find the highlight. Let me get you a bit closer so it's more visually notable, but this is something that we do want to be pretty subtle. So if it doesn't stand out and scream at you, it's not a bad thing. We can also, in the foreground, in the real foreground, apply it under our highlights, and it's just going to give us this extra layer of really nice depth. So we're going to, again, get a little bit closer. We're going to head into the edge here. And I'm just going to do this beautiful little tap from the side till we find the highlight, and we can kind of intermix this with some of the highlights. We'll have little openings, right? And I think bringing those back and forth with this is great. As we move farther away, we'll do less taps, more lines. But this is a really subtle way of bringing the blues of the sky back down into the water. It'll just feel good. Hints here and there. Little lines. Already I feel like it's so much more dynamic on the edges. go over this a couple of times until we build it up to be what we really want it to be. There we go. And we can also take this and do little dots. Build in that texture. Already, I love it. Now we'll go back to our larger flat-headed brush. We'll interject some extra titanium white into the mixture. Just make it slightly brighter, not too much, but slightly. I'll also add a lot of water so that the paint stays alive while we complete this set of highlight. But here, now, one more time, we can go in with a brighter mix of that blue, especially towards the front here, and make this come alive. So, similar technique to the highlight, just a little bit different. Again, we can do hints of it under here, should we want to. Little taps out in the sand, especially towards the darker portions. We did the taps of the light towards the center, we do the taps of the blue towards the outskirts. Just looks like nice gleaming rocks, pebbles, bits of water that protrude. Bubbles. So many potential subjects. And I might throw those little taps into the first couple waves of water in the in-between spots. This will exist here too. We'll see those details this close. Very good. As an update, we are passing the brush to my partner, and she is touching up the highlights at the front, trying to make it look a little bit more natural and organic. I think she's going in with some taps just so it's less perfect and straight, which makes a lot of sense. So there will be little bubbles and protrusions, it'll hit little rocks, different things that change that shape from being perfect. And I think that's often something we struggle with when we start painting. We make things too perfect. So, good little reminder here to be playful with your strokes. And yeah, I think that's already looking a lot better. Thank you, love.
Thanks.
All right, so we reworked some things. I love the foreground, I love the highlights. I think at this point I'm ready to give the water a break. We're going to work in the sailboat. We're going to cover the final remaining pieces of still white canvas. Always an exciting thing in a painting. And with that, let's make some nice silhouettes to get a base layer in there, and then we can have fun with the detail. Now, the first mix for a sailboat is going to be quite dark. It's essentially going to be a silhouette, but we want it to have a little bit of red, a little bit of blue, bit of titanium white. We don't want it to be too dark. We don't want it to be as dark as the foreground. So we are interjecting some of this. More of the blue, more of the red. I kind of have to dig in there for the red, but we've still got it. And I think this is great. We can make it darker if we want to in the really dark spots of the boat. We can make it a lot lighter. And it works in both the warmer areas of the shadow, but also the cooler, which we can continue to accentuate in the painting. So we are going to get in nice and close here, grab that pigment with our larger flat-headed brush, and these first applications I think should be done around the edges so we can define the shape of our boat first and foremost. You can see how it comes back here, and then there's a bit of a dip. That way the back of the boat is aligned like this. And this is the left-hand side, this is the right-hand side. So we're just defining that as well, making sure that there is a nice dip. And if you lost the sketch of your boat during the painting process, you can always just go ahead and resketch that on beforehand. I did myself. You can also, if you need to, download that traceable. Again, it's up over on Patreon. There's a link to it in the video description, and it just helps you jump into the painting process. You don't have to worry about getting all of your line work and whatnot, all of the perspective correct. Also, like to say a big thank you to everybody who is up over on Patreon. You make these lessons happen. You make it so that I can do this full time and make these really long videos. I think if I didn't have this time, I'd probably just have to do a bunch of speed paintings and little stuff like that, but you make these happen. You make these possible, and I want to say a big, big thank you to you for that. It's an honor to make these and teach and hopefully inspire some painting day by day. Also, if you're new here and unaware, up over on Patreon, you can also get an image of all of the materials. You can use the exact brands. You can get a bunch of bonus lessons. Up there we have over 100 lessons that are only up on Patreon, some of which are on big 24 by 36 inch canvases. Currently finishing up a 24 by 24 one. I think I actually intend to do that this weekend. But you can get a bunch of bonus videos up there. You can also get my ebook, which is Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials. Everything you need to know about acrylic painting before you jump into your first acrylic painting. Make starting feel a lot less intimidating. Bunch of ebooks full of traceables. Get access to our exclusive Facebook group where everybody shares their renditions of these pieces, and it's a wonderfully inspiring, positive group. Whenever I pop in, I feel like I always get new ideas. You can also get all of these videos, all of the new videos, ad-free. So, if you've been watching this with ads, you don't have to. And you don't have to watch the next one with ads. You just watch them up there and it solves that. Just my little way of saying thank you for supporting the channel and making these videos happen. You can't do it, I fully respect it. But if you can, it's much appreciated. Always feels like a big thank you. And I thank you for that. Right now we're just still painting in that silhouette, starting with all of the big pieces first. As you can see. We'll add nice highlights and whatnot to these after. But for now, we're keeping it really simple. Changing the reference photo a little bit. I'm not going to do the mast in this because I think I do that in a different color. And then we need to work on this line. I'm going to be very careful with it. I'm also not going to talk, I'm going to just make sure that I'm really focused in. So let's do this. Okay, good start. I like that. Let's go here. We really want to make sure that these applications are as thin as possible. And I think we're doing great. Applying as little pressure as I possibly can with my brush. There we go. So close. Don't get too eager though. Start painting too quickly. Might need a second layer, but I think for the most part this is good. There we are. All right, so now we'll take a couple steps back. We'll make sure we like the look. We can touch up some of the areas that might still be exposed to canvas. And I have a couple towards the bottom just because I was using the larger flat-headed brush and just trying to be careful. But I'm also going to use this opportunity to do a second coat on some of the thin areas. That said, I think this is very strong. And we were patient with our applications. We were also rewarded with our applications. If they're a little bit more thin towards the top, that's also okay. You have that pink showing through, and just make it look like light's wrapping around it already. So, good, easy look. That said, I think it's time we work on our mix for right here. On second thought, I want to finish the base of the boat, which means making this darker silhouette two things. One, cooler. Two, warmer. So I'm going to start with a mid-gray, something akin to what we just had, but maybe a hint brighter. Then, on the left-hand side, we're going to go in with some Cad Red, just like so. Maybe a hint of our Cad Yellow Deep. Love that. Now, to the right-hand side, my right hand, maybe your left hand, we are going to go in with our Ultramarine Blue. And this will be for the shadow portions of the boat that are opposite to the light, and this will be the areas that are facing the light. Two subtle pigments, but they work well together. Now I'm going to switch on over to the smaller flat-headed brush, so we have a bit more detail work option. I'll grab that more reddish orange mix. I'll apply that to the edge of the boat that is closest to the light, as you can see. And then I'll start blending it backwards. And then I'll keep it towards the top, like so, but down at the bottom here it's a lot darker. So in that area, that's where we'll grab our blue, apply that, make sure that it's nice and cool. Now it isn't just a silhouette, it shares colors with the rest of the painting. And I'll do a soft blend into the reddish oranges. So now it goes from warm to cool, as it should. We can also grab more of that warm red, and we'll apply that to the tops of this cloth up here. The light will wrap around it. It will feel warm as well. We can apply a little bit to the bottom. But then in the middle, we're not going to have all of that warmth because the fabric itself will be too dense. The light just won't be able to wrap around it to that extent. We can also add this blue into the backs of our more vertical markings, like that. And we can switch on over to our liner, grab those highlights, and then apply those to the right-hand sides of those vertical markings as well. So that again, it just feels warm when things are touching that edge. Double down on that which is working well. There we are. From there, I think we grab a little bit of extra titanium white, work that into that red mix, add a little bit of our yellow, a little more red, really just boost that up in value. Now we'll apply that to the edge, around the top, like so. And then we can blend it back. Probably want to blend it into the regular red again, so I'll just grab some more of that. That way it gets darker in a very natural way. Right now it looks a bit brighter than it did because it's just so wet. There's a lot of water on the brush. But then we can move it into the blue. And just like that, solid transition. Let's go back up to that bright pigment. Throw it on the top here. Throw it on the top here. Top here. Top here. We might even make a darker mixture of our blue. So just add extra Mars black into it. We'll do some separating lines in our boat. So again, the back comes up like that, but then let's also apply it to the base. Maybe through here. And then we'll mix that into more of the blue mix that we had. I have to remix a little bit of it. But let's go back to that. That way we can have a transition from one into the next. We don't want it to look too stark, but we do want that differentiation. We can also take that darker mix and work it into the bottom and the back of this. Just building depth through values. From there, I want a brighter detail on this, right along the lip. I drew it in the traceable, it's in the reference photo. I think it's a good detail. So I'll grab some of our titanium white, I'll build up in that highlight of the darker, I'll build it up in the highlight here too. So towards the back, we have more of the blue mix. Like so, and we'll just run this forward. We'll have it work its way back here too. And then we'll transition it at about the halfway point to the warmer version. And now, very simply, we have a great bonus detail. Can make it a little bit darker for the back here, but we still want it to be relatively bright, like so. I think we did a great job. We can do a little details on the side of the boat. Maybe it's a word in the distance, little taps. Could actually spell it out, but I like the idea of keeping it relatively subtle. Might double down on that highlight again. Yeah, that's fun. That's really fun. So now we'll grab some extra titanium white, mix that in, liner brush, even closer, even brighter. Might add that slight highlighter across the rim, catching a little bit of metal. Can add just a hint of it up into here. Not too much though. There we go. Great little additions. You know, I might also take a couple of steps back, grab a little bit of that black, red, blue, hint of titanium white, make a very similar pigment to what we used in the darker areas of the water. We'll do a little test down there, make sure that it is what we want. And then with the liner and a lot of water, making it like a wash, just create a bit of a wash, a bit of a shadow underneath the boat, and it'll dissipate as we get farther out from it. It's under it, but it's also moving this way a little bit. And I think this is just a nice subtle detail. We will have a shadow. It is a dramatic lighting scheme. And just like that. Great bonus detail. Wanted to wait until we did a lot more of the water to incorporate it, but I think we waited until the right time. All right, now I want some bonus highlights on the boat, and we'll do that with our Cad Yellow, Cad Red, Titanium White, hint of our Mars Black. We want a good orange here, relatively saturated. I think that's beautiful. We can apply that right to the edge. Just like that. Okay. We can add a little more titanium white. I don't want to make this too dramatic. I don't want to stand out, have it stand out or compete with the sun highlight wise. But I do think it has opportunity to be nice and glowy. Just like so. You can even incorporate a little bit of that reflection down here. Make it soft. I might also take a little bit of that highlight and just place it towards the top. Right here, I think that orange in the sky right next to the blue can look really beautiful. I want to keep these markings small, and we can just run this down towards the bottom, provided we're extremely careful. Just makes it feel a little bit better. Maybe more of a highlight towards the top. It's a good look. It's a really good look. All right, so love the details, love the base of the boat. I think we have the right balance of warm and cool shadows, as well as subtle highlights. Those highlights are important, but you don't want them to overshadow the reflections in the water, the actual sun itself. I really like where it is. And from there, we're on to the final piece of open canvas, and yet again, of course, the palette. Now for this, I want, first of all, a brighter to neutral gray. So I'm grabbing some of our titanium white, a little bit of our Mars Black. Don't want a lot of Mars Black, so I'm just grabbing it very gradually. We'll interject that, we'll grab a little bit more. We don't want this to stand out dramatically, but we also don't want it to be too dark. We want light to be able to pass through it. So once I have a gray, I'm going to make a more pinkish orange mix over here. And that'll be the first pigment for the highlight showing through. Then we can go a bit more saturated. So we increase the saturation by adding more of our actual hues. I think that's great. Now we'll move over to the shadows in it. And for that, we are, you guessed it, using a little bit of this so it's cohesive, but also quite a bit of our ultramarine blue. And we'll make that nice and rich as well. So we're going for a similar level of saturation and a similar value to begin with. So we'll start by grabbing that blue mix. I'm going to apply it towards the top here. I start to drag it down. Nice clean line. I almost always make little markings to get a subject in, but with this I'm doing elongated markings so that it's smooth and it has this flow. It is fabric in the wind if you think about it. Now we need a bit more water on our brush. We'll make it a little bit brighter, maybe a little bit more blue. And I'll move to the slight right-hand side of that. So now we have some light passing through it, like so. We'll bring that down to about this midsection. Do a soft blend with the darker mix that we have. We can also apply that towards the base and the back, leaving this section right here in the central area. And with that, we'll clean our brush really well. We'll take off all of that excess pigment that we can. We'll go and we'll grab, you know what, I think I might make it a little bit warmer, a little bit brighter. We'll grab that warmer mix. I'll apply that on the edge. And then we'll blend it inwards. Once I have the majority of that space filled up, then we'll blend it into the actual blues. So it's a gradual blend, it's a safe blend. We want to do a lot to this, but it's a great base. We have our warm hues, we have our cool hues, feels cohesive, and let's get a bit closer, make it a lot better. All right, so now that we're nice and close, we'll grab some extra cad yellow, titanium white, hint of that cad red, mix up an even brighter, more saturated, sun-soaked pigment, like so. We'll apply that to the heart of this. We'll do a slight blend back. I am switching, as you can see, to the liner brush because we do want to really work within our details here. And we're off to a very strong start. Let's double down on our titanium white. This will desaturate it a little bit, but I think that's okay. And gradually building these highlights. It'll show up quite nicely against the orange here, because while it's a saturated pigment, saturated orange, it's very dark in value, so a brighter value will pop wonderfully. There we go. We can also take portions of this highlight and bounce them off the backs of these highlights. A little bit towards the front of the boat so it's nice and cohesive. Don't want to do too much, but again, I think that's a-okay. More of that titanium white, cad yellow. We just keep bumping it up, blending it back. Okay, and yet again, we are taking a step back, giving the painting as a whole a good look. We're going in with an even brighter yellow. We're bumping up this maybe one more time to the point where these highlights almost get lost in these highlights. And then it feels wonderfully cohesive. Everything's just kind of light-wise bleeding into other light. And it has this great glow effect on the boat. We'll do a soft blend. Make sure that it's working nicely. I like that. Might do a hint of it. On this guy right here. Just finding different areas of incorporating these beautiful highlights without it feeling like it's too much. I also think I want to grab some of our Mars black, our blue, hint of our titanium white, make a good darker shadow mixture, similar to that of what we have in the mid to back of the boat. And we can paint on extra little ropes and strings, things that work through this. Lots of details. There we go. We can incorporate little boxes and pieces to the boat. Little protrusions in there. Make it feel a little more natural, lifelike. Love that. Then we can go with a much brighter version of it. Maybe incorporate some shadows under portions of this and inside. Maybe a more saturated blue. I think that makes everything pop wonderfully. But if we do that, we want to blend it. Make sure it too is nice and soft. There we go. So far, I love it. I think we're at that point where I'm really happy with the water, I'm really happy with the sand, I'm really happy with the sky, the boat as well, and now we're kind of at that point of touch-ups. And that's just always so cathartic, rewarding. I think I want a couple more of our bright highlights towards the front and center, towards the water. And this is one of those things where while we were doing it, I thought about it, but I didn't want to do it until we did the back and this, because I didn't want to make the painting not balanced. And we don't know how much highlight we can incorporate into this until we know how much incorporated highlight we have in the back. So now we can go in and we can bump some of these highlights up. I think that works wonderfully. Bonus little taps here and there along the outskirts, just like so. We can also do so with more of our blues if you want those in these areas. I might tap in some of these highlights in the sand. And the sand, wet sand, can almost look like stars and galaxies in a really neat way. You paint them quite similarly, and if you just hyper focus on this area and you don't look anywhere else, it kind of looks like space. A lot of those similar techniques, and it makes it pretty dreamy, pretty warm, pretty special. I love that. I love that a lot. Might also take some of these highlights and just work them up into here again. Lots of spots you can always iterate on and make all that you want them to be. Make sure that this is nice and straight. We could also grab some of that highlight and that yellow and create some bonus details in the clouds. It's not too late for that either. Oh, I love that. Just open it up a bit. So we can bounce around, we can have fun. Really just follow the passion at this point. Make sure that we have a lot of good clean lines, that the eye moves in the ways that we want it to. And most importantly, that it feels good. That when you look at the painting, you feel like you're out by the water, you're experiencing a sight, a vision that will render a memory you're not going to forget, something that's going to make you feel warm, nostalgic. You never know. These images, we all carry different associations. You just want to feel something at the end. You want to make the viewer feel something. And I think when I look at this, I remember summers on the beach with great cool wind and wet feet. Skin that's still kind of toasty. You question if you have a sunburn, and you love those moments. I think that's really what we're aiming for here. But again, would like to say a big thank you to all of you here for watching, for painting along with me. This was such a pleasure to put together. Put me in a great place. And I hope it did you too. I hope you feel inspired. I hope you feel like you learned something. I hope you're excited to pick up the brush and render something that means something to you. Feel free to take artistic liberties and have fun with it. Again, if you'd like help with getting the initial sketch on the canvas, if you really like painting but you kind of struggle with the sketching process, the traceable is up on Patreon. There's a link to it in the description. Big thank you to everybody up over on Patreon. If you'd like to work with the exact same brushes as me, there's a link in the video description for that as well. you can also find the materials and all of that up there. So with that, this painting is nice, it's done. I'd love to know what you'd love for me to paint in future lessons. Been painting a lot more lately. Feel fairly settled after the move, and I'm really just enjoying diving into these canvases. We've been doing a lot with architecture lately. Here took a bit of a break from that, but still did something human made with a really nice boat, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we do next. I think maybe some fall paintings are in order. I think maybe some rainy street reflections could be quite neat. There's a lot that I know I'm still inspired by, but I'd love to know what you're inspired by. Let me know, and we'll work on that. Big thank you to you for being here. Big thank you to my partner, Athena, for helping me with this painting and editing along. And big thank you to all the patrons at home. So I will see you soon with a brand new painting lesson, probably in the next couple of days if you're up over on Patreon with the final 24 by 24 inch piece episode. But all that said, thank you for being here. I'll see you soon. And above all, as always, stay creative.